What is that terrible racket? If you're hearing that when you're playing slide guitar, you need help. Let's fix it. When we play slide guitar, muting is incredibly important. Otherwise, you're just going to hear all the strings ringing. So imagine you want to play a melody that just goes and you just got two notes. You don't want all six strings ringing, you just want that one string. So let's dive into this and find out what the solution is. Do we need to mute behind the slide? I'm going to say no. Now there are people on both sides of this fence. There are some people who say you have to mute behind the slide. There are other people who say don't mute behind the slide. Of course, it's entirely up to you and the sound that you're going for, but Raikuda doesn't mute behind the slide. This sound where you get extra, try and make that clear on a different pickup. If I mute, you'll find that what happens when you mute behind the slide is you stop all the extra harmonics and overtones that sound behind the slide from making an appearance. Now, maybe you want that, maybe you don't. I personally don't. I like to hear those sounds. I don't want to stop them ringing. You'll find that the material of the slide, whether you're playing acoustic or electric, all these things come into play as well. So it really depends on your setup and what you want to do and the sound that you're going for. But personally, I don't feel the need to mute behind the slide. I like that sound, and the players that I love don't mute behind the slide. So that's my take on that side of it. Now let's look at right hand muting. Do we need to mute with the right hand? And the answer here is an emphatic yes, you must. Okay, now the challenge we've got here is that when you move the slide across the string, it's rubbing on all the other strings. So if you just wanted to play on one string, and did it without right hand muting, it's going to sound a mess. That's where it's going to sound like a racket. The fact that I'm not muting behind the slide is that's not the issue here. It's the right hand. So let's look at what the right hand does. The benefit here for conventional playing as well is if you can work on muting when you're playing slide, that'll carry over into your conventional playing, and a lot of people probably need to mute more than they think when they're playing conventionally. One thing I will say is if you really want to, test this out for yourself, play loud with lots of overdrive, because that will really accentuate any extra notes coming out that you don't want. Okay, so I play slide with my fingers. Part of the reason I do this is because I find it works better for me for muting with this hand. So this is entirely up to you. If you use a pick, then that's fine too, and you'll just need to adapt what I'm talking about to playing slide with a pick and doing the muting. But I'll show you what I do with the right hand. So imagine we want to play on the first string. I want to make sure that all the other strings are muted, and the way that I do that is I just rest my thumb. This part here is just resting on the lower strings. I also use the tip of my first finger a little bit on the second string just to just move across and touch that string. But basically I just want to get only that first string ringing. So that's an easy one. The challenge comes as we move across the strings. So if I want to play on string 2, what I'm going to need to do is mute those lower strings. So the lower sounding strings with my thumb, and I'm going to use a finger to mute the higher sounding string, which is the first string. So I'm on string 2, I'm going to use thumb and index finger, and what I'm doing is I'm using my middle finger to mute the first string, and the side of my thumb and the heel of my hand just to mute those lower sounding strings. And basically that's the principle as you move across the strings. Any strings that are higher in pitch, you would use your fingers, and any strings that are lower in pitch, you would use the side of the thumb or the heel of the hand. So all of this needs to be practiced very slowly. You have to just get used to the whole process of where does my right hand need to be when I'm actually trying to play on a particular string with the slide. And of course, if you're playing a pair of strings, then the same principle applies. It's just you're muting less strings this time. Now, what if we're playing across the strings? What if we're not just sat on one string moving up and down? What if we want to go across the strings, which we're going to need to do at some point? Well, a good way of practicing this is just to take groups of 2 or 3 strings. I'm going to do 3 strings. I'm going to be playing at the 5th fret, and I'm going to rest the slide on that fret. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my heel of my hand on the lower strings. I'm going to use my middle finger on string 1, my first finger on string 2, and my thumb will play string 3. So I'm just playing those 3 notes. Okay, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to play the string, I'm going to rest that finger back on the string. Then I'm going to play the second string, I'm going to rest back on the string. I'm going to use my thumb and I'm going to rest back on the string. So basically you play the string and put that finger back on the string. Now when I move across to the next group of strings, if I do it on strings 2, 3 and 4, I'm going to mute with my third finger on string 1, and I'm going to use thumb and fingers 1 and 2 again. So that's my second finger. That's my first finger going back on the string. That's my thumb going back on the strings. And then I go across again. And in this case, I'm using my third finger, I'm actually wedging it between the strings. I just want to make sure that somehow I touch the strings that I don't want to hear. So I'm playing strings 3, 4 and 5. And I'm just keeping that third finger to mute strings 1 and 2. And actually my little finger's coming into play a little bit here as well, just to mute that first string. And then if I were on the last 3 strings, I'm really going to use my third finger and little finger just to mute those higher strings. The trick with this is to do it super slow, so just get used to the movement. It doesn't matter what, if you're going, you know, you can kind of play around on those 3 strings once you're getting more comfortable with it, but the goal is just to be programming into your brain and into your fingers exactly what those fingers need to do at a slow pace. Just playing real simple stuff. We're just really trying to get that hand to keep everything nice and clean and tidy sounding, and not have strings ringing that you don't want. The last thing I'll say on this, sometimes we want those extra strings to ring. You know, one of the hallmarks of slide guitar is what happens when you get a pair of you know, sometimes we want those strings to ring. It's kind of what makes slide guitar sound great on one level, you know, is that ability to hold those 2 or 3 notes together and get them to sound, especially in an open tuning, but you find ways to do it in standard tuning as well. So bear in mind that sometimes we're going to not want to mute with this hand, but we have to develop this control. So a final exercise I think is useful for this would be to take a scale or an arpeggio or just some little musical device that goes across the strings and apply your muting to that. So I might take a C major scale, for instance. I'm in open D here, but it doesn't matter what tuning you're in. Playing a C major scale, maybe playing it up, maybe playing it in different intervals, so you could take every other note and play it in thirds. Or flip them around, go up a third and down the next one. Basically trying to use musical materials, scales, arpeggios, other musical vocabulary that you have to actually focus on this, to focus on the right hand. So trying to play that as cleanly as you can, and just trying to get that right hand to really do its job of keeping everything tidy. And it's the same principle. I'm just resting. When I play on the 5th string, I'm using the bottom of my hand, kind of, in this case kind of nearer here, just to make sure that that's muted, and then my fingers are doing the higher sounding strings. You know, so you can improvise a little bit with the scale, and your focus is just on keeping things really tidy and clean sounding. We don't want that racket. We want a nice clean sound. And then once you can do that, if you want to make it dirtier and have some notes ringing, that's all well and good as well. I hope that's been helpful. In summary, left hand muting is optional, right hand muting is essential. Work on it slowly, take your time. You can use any kind of musical vocabulary and material that you want, and just make sure that you program it in really slow so that when it comes time to play, you don't have to think about any of this stuff. Your right hand just does what it needs to do, and your left hand is able to focus on playing the notes that you want to play. If you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like more of this kind of stuff. Put some comments below if you want some help. I'll see you next time.